And I think for the sake of time, we will get started. So welcome. Thank you for joining us. I have lost the feature where I can see your faces, but I'm glad you're here. And I know that many of you are familiar with Zoom by now. So I just want to highlight one thing. You can take a look at some of these quick tips, but we want this to be a space where you can be as present as possible. And so we've encouraged folks in the past to turn on their videos, and whatever works best for you and allows you to be most present in this space, we invite you to join in that way. And sometimes it's helpful to turn speaker view on if you can find that button on your screen. That way you can really channel in on the person who is speaking. So just sharing what we have in mind for today. We'll of course welcome you as we are now. And then I'll turn things over to my colleagues, Yodit Mesfin-Johnson and Will Jones, to help ground us in this space and conversation. And then we'll transition into our conversation with our panelists, Leseliey, Hoai An, and Belinda. And then we'll do a little bit of wrap up, and we have some ideas for how we are imagining the question and answer part of this. So we'll offer an opportunity for you to share questions in the chat box, and then if you're available to stay a little bit beyond 12:15 and would like to use your voices to ask some questions in a more intimate space, we'll invite you to do that as well. And again, there are a lot of things that you can read on this screen, but one thing we wanted to highlight was just how we started Centering Justice, which was a way to uplift voices of leaders of color in our community as we were experiencing the shifts brought on by the pandemic. And one thing that was really heartening, and at least for me, it was unexpected, was this feeling of community that came about through this program and through what were then bi-weekly sessions, and people who were really committed to being in this space that centers justice. And so what I want to invite today is for you to think about what's bringing you to this space today. And for me, what brings me to this space is the feeling that each of the speakers we have had the honor of working with and featuring in this series is manifesting a vision for the future that really lights something up in me. And I hope that you feel the same. So we're almost ready to transition into our conversation. And before we do that, I want to turn things over to my colleagues, Will Jones and Yodit, to just offer a little more grounding in the space.
Thanks, Ananya. It's really good to be with all of you today. And I appreciate you grounding us in sort of what calls us into this moment. And I think it has been an awakening in me. So what brings me here is a deep longing to connect to the things that I know deep down in my soul, in my belly, and not feel as tethered to all the things I know in my head and, cerebrally, right? And it is in that spirit that when we were thinking about how to open this space and how to celebrate ancestral practices, how to draw upon our roots, that rather than a slide with, we typically center with some data points, that today we would actually begin with some spoken word and poetry. And I have found the words of Will Jones, who is my colleague here at NEW, to be nourishing and just to really resonate in me, I needed to hear his voice in this moment. I know that to be true. So I'd like to stop talking now, invite Will to offer, and then I want to come back when Will's done and talk a little bit about our hopes and aspirations and what prompted us to be with our speakers. So Ananya, if I could ask that you stop sharing the screen just so that, and folks may choose to go on speaker view, or we now have this beautiful gallery, and Will is in the upper left corner on my screen. But Will, if you wouldn't mind, so yeah, I'm gonna switch over to speaker view on my computer. That means I'll only see Will. And Will, we would love to hear from you now. And I guess in addition to being an amazing poet, Will is a friend. He's a fellow radical Imagineer, and he is the person who holds relationships for New as our relationship manager. Will?
Thank you all very much. Happy to be here with you this afternoon. These are just a couple of things that I wrote over the weekend in reflection. You know, Independence Day has been, 4th of July has not been Independence Day to me for a long time. And so this is just a little bit of my heart and those feelings around that. So thank you very much. In 1776, my ancestors were still enslaved. Please don't get it twisted. While Hamilton is a beautiful artistic rendering of historical events, and it is incredible to see founders represented in the Black, Indigenous, people of color, and immigrants off of whose labor and death their legacies were built, that is not how we actually show up in the story. I wish it were, but it isn't. My family had been here for 150 years, since 1619, caged and shackled, 150 years beaten, tortured, and raped, 150 years building and sewing and caring for a nation that would never do anything but oppress them. Yes, we were there. Our bodies were on the stage, but even now, our stories are still kept in the background. The true heroes are not the men who were pissed off at the price of peppermint tea. It is the people whose backs were never broken, the people who continued to pick themselves back up time and again for decades, for centuries. The people who never let white supremacy steal their culture and heritage, who never gave up their native tongue. The people who still believe that land cannot be owned by humanity. The people whose voices have never stopped singing songs of freedom. It is because of them that we can. Let's honor their legacies instead. I am the product of a garden that was tended, of Black soil that was nurtured, despite acid rain and toxic smog, despite scorching summers and bone-chilling winters, despite many cloudy days, I am still blooming. Thank you all.
Yeah. Thank you, Will. I think about the story you told when you came back from your family's property in Virginia and how you have your great-grandmother's irises planted at you and your wife's home. Now, those very irises that were on the land of your ancestors that fought for the very freedom and liberation that I think brings us all together today. I'm fighting for that. I hope that you're fighting for that. I'm interested in a co-liberated future where every person who wants has an opportunity to live into their fullest potential. And I believe that white supremacy and the ways in which we're tethered to whiteness are a threat to that. And so, as Ananya said, centering justice is about offering the beautiful futures that our leaders of color in this community are imagining. And when I saw George Floyd murdered in Minneapolis and thought about the relationships to policing, I was thinking about growing up in the city of Detroit. And in my childhood, I can't recall a time I saw a police car in our neighborhood. There was a fabric woven amongst our neighbors who were diverse in identity, even though we were a majority Black or a chocolate city. There was a set of values that were operating in the community that didn't require us to call someone from outside of the community to come to resolve conflict. And that's not to say that there wasn't problems, there were, but we were able to find a way together to resolve conflict that didn't involve the state. And as calls for defunding the police and abolishing the police came forth, I think the natural next question is, well, what is the alternative? And that got me thinking about Belinda Dulin's work at the Dispute Resolution Center. Way before we were having the current conversation, Belinda and her team have been striving to incorporate peacekeeping practices and restorative justice practices into our community outside of systems of government. That was what they've been doing. Similarly, mutual aid societies, which we really saw come together here in our community and across the country, have existed almost as long as the country has, as folks sought to give one another aid when that wasn't available to certain parts of our country or certain people within our country. And lastly, but certainly not, it doesn't fall light on me, Leseliey Welsh, who is here from Birth Detroit and the Birth Center Equity Fund, reminded me last week that every time there's a national disaster, much like the pandemic or even the national uprisings related to racial injustice, that we experience the trauma of that for generations to come. And that really rocked me to my core, to think that the babies being born today have within them the trauma of what their mothers were holding in these months, in the most important time for many of carrying life in our bodies. And I'll just offer to you, back to peacekeeping, just a quick story before I hand it over to our speakers. Yesterday morning, I get up every morning and I go on my porch to commune with God and nature and to catch my breath. And yesterday I walked out of my door and there was a minivan and the windows were down and two people were in the van. And it was unclear to me from my vantage point if they were okay. In fact, I worried if something had happened. I'd never seen them before, I'd never seen the van. It was concerning to me that at 6 o'clock in the morning, these people who didn't appear to be conscious to me, and I got really afraid. My first instinct, in fact, was to call the police. Like, I thought that maybe something had happened. In my neighborhood, there's been a barrage of fireworks that feel and sound also a lot like gunfire. And so my first mind said, oh my God, maybe something violent had happened to them. And I was a bit afraid to approach the vehicle. And then, you know, as many of you have, I had this sort of process of what are the consequences of every step I take, including if they're in trouble, right? I don't want to take too much time doing nothing if there were a way to help, but also, well, what would happen if I called the police? And I started to think about the scenario of, well, what if they just had too much to drink and pulled over, right? If I call the police and they're sitting in the vehicle's driver's seat, that's a DUI, right? And I also felt like, well, here I am, a woman, kind of vulnerable, right? Like, do I want to approach this vehicle? And that went on in my mind. And ultimately, I just hollered out, brother, sister, are you okay? And it took a couple times. And eventually one of them awoke and realized that they were in front of someone's house. And the driver also then awoke and he apologized, ma'am, I'm just so sorry. I needed some rest, and we pulled over. And as I reflected on the number of scenarios that could have happened. I was just thinking about how I'm so grateful that over the last few years, I've had people pour into me, and I've had the opportunity to learn more about how our biases, how our deeply held dominant culture values often inform the way we think about things, the way we respond to things. So I offer that as a way to segue into, I need Belinda, I need Leseliey, I need Hoai An, I need all of you to help me to get my head around a vision for our future that is rooted in deep care and regard for our fellow humans, and that also allows us to replace some of the systems we've built that are harmful and that perpetuate the institutional, systematic, oppressive, insidious disease of racism that pervades our country. And so with that, I want to offer an opportunity for our panelists to introduce themselves. And we're going to do this with them responding to the question, what does beloved community look like to you?
Are we starting with me?
Yeah, Leseliey, please feel free.
Hello everyone, my name is Leseliey Welsh. I live here in Ipsy. I spent the majority of my working life in public health in Detroit. And beloved community to me begins with how we're born and how we're held. Right? How we're born and how we're held. Deep mentioned, my sharing about the impact of this moment. And I think it cannot be understated that this moment that we are experiencing with the pandemic, with the necessary uprisings, will live in our bodies for generations to come. This idea, right, that we hold yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And it is, one of the reasons why birth is so phenomenal and so important. And it's not only important that, healthy babies result, but the whole of it is important, right? And this comes from, I can explain it in so many dimensions, right? From a spiritual dimension, from a cultural dimension, and also from a purely biological and research dimension. It's true on so many levels. We have a whole field of emerging research called fetal origins. We have epigenetics. We know, right, that it's like we send our babies biological postcards from this world about the future they're coming into. Whether or not there'll be scarcity or abundance, danger or safety, whether they'll be valued or devalued, loved or not. And we have seen this in studies throughout history from times of famine and depression, like the Hunger Winter, right? Folks who were pregnant at that time experienced more stillbirths, more low birth weight. The babies who grew up experienced more diabetes, obesity. Same with 9/11, post-traumatic stress disorder for folks who were pregnant in that time, and biological markers for that for babies who came later. And so imagine for a moment, right? Imagine for a moment applying that same knowing, right, to hundreds of years of slavery. There are studies that look at descendants of slavery and birth outcomes. And then we have present day studies that look at race and racism and how it gets into our bodies, pregnant or not, right? Related to our stress levels and impacting our health. And for our pregnant bodies, experiences of racism in childhood impact our pregnant bodies and our birth outcomes, our low birth weight, our preterm birth, babies born too small, born too soon. And so being now in a pandemic where Black bodies are, experiencing a trauma that's even more magnified than the whole. And then being now in a space where the state-sanctioned violence we've experienced for generations is now front and center to the world to wake up to. how is that impacting our bodies in this moment, right? How is it impacting, right, our pregnant folks? We know that they want birth centers because they don't want to go into hospitals that are overwhelmed from COVID-19. Folks know that, that's in the news. But folks are not talking about what we'll see 9 months from now, a year from now, with our babies born being too soon, born too early, stillborn, miscarriages, the whole of it. And so my invitation to us is to like sit with that, right? That the impact of this moment will live in our bodies for generations. And so our responsibility to reimagine and prepare for and make way for birth spaces that are created with our best interest in mind, for birth spaces that are sacred, loving, and celebratory, that see our lives in social and historical context, and that have our health, our well-being, and our collective liberation in mind is critical. And that's part and parcel of what we aim to do with Birth Detroit. Safe, quality, loving care for all birthing families. And what we aim to do with the Birth Center Equity Fund is make that care possible in all communities. And so, thank you for having me.
That was some extremely powerful stuff there, Leslie. I still get goosebumps thinking about the first time that we were speaking and you shared that idea. And that not even the idea, I mean, just like the factual knowledge of the generational impacts of not only this moment, but the moments that have gotten us here, right? That is deep. That is deep, to say the least. We hold yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And I look forward to hearing some more about, you know, these awesome birth spaces that you are in the process of helping build across the nation, well, across the state right now. I think that the dream is across the world.
We'd love to ask the same question of Belinda. Belinda, can you talk to us about what beloved community looks like for you?
Yeah, so thank you to the new team for inviting me to such an awesome panel and discussion with community members. I really appreciate it. Listening to Leslie, like Will, it always gives me goosebumps to think about how we bring children into the world and we nurture them into healthy, valuable human beings. And we create strong families from that, and we create stronger communities from that because of our human connectedness that begins at birth. So when I think about this question of, so one, greetings from the Dispute Resolution Center. We've been around for a while, helping people resolve conflict, and peacemaking has become one of those spaces and learnings and opportunities that I'm only sorry that I didn't learn to do that first, like when I was learning to talk. That I learned the language of peacemaking. And maybe in some ways I did, and I just didn't know what to call it. In my beloved community, which I, like your deed, I think about all the time, what can I do to contribute to that? And I think the first step of having that beloved community for me is making sure that every person in our community is valued for who they are and what they bring to the community. That's something that we've moved too far away from. Seeing the value in each and every person, removing these artificial boundaries that we have built between each other. In Yudi's example, with the story she shared in the opening about the car outside her house. What if she had called the police? What if she did not have a moment to reassess how she values those human beings sitting in the vehicle? So we have to be able to see the value in people. In my beloved community, we still have conflict. And I see a space in the community that I think of as the well. just a well where we can gather, where we can go and be replenished and be restored when things go sideways in our lives or go sideways between people. Because in every community, we know that there will be conflict. The conflict doesn't go anyplace. But to move away from our reliance on police and other institutions to solve our problems for us is a part of that beloved community. We have resources, we have our own wisdom, we become a resource to each other, and we move away from these oppressive institutions, these institutions of hierarchy and very patriarchy are a part of these institutions. And because we see the value in each other, we rely on each other to help us move beyond our conflict and move beyond our problems and reach resolutions and solutions that will not just solve the problem, but will also bring healing and restoration to ourselves, to each other, and to the community. So that's what I see at this, this beloved community. I also think another important component is that we force institutions to redefine their role and be a part of the community, not to sit outside of the community, not to create, again, that hierarchy of, that we go to and rely on, but they engage with us as human beings and help us move towards solutions together. I'm gonna share a very quick story, and I know I want to be respectful of time, but this morning I spent unexpectedly a couple hours with a young mother who was at risk of losing her child, quite frankly. Her parental rights could be terminated. She has some cognitive challenges. She has some disabilities, but is that a reason to remove her child? And as she was on this session with 13 people, she was alone. Where was her mother, her grandmother, her auntie, a friend, a cousin? And as the conversations escalated, and they're hard conversations, these are hard conversations, she began to cry. And I paused the meeting to give her that space to cry. And I asked people to focus on her emotion. Let's make sure she feels connected as a young woman who had a baby just 6 months ago today. This is a newborn baby. Let's restore her humanity. This is not about the incident of a court case or a docket or a file. This is about a human being who's having a very low moment in life. And I was hoping that for 2 minutes, that we can become that restorative well for her, so that we can show her, demonstrate for her that in communities, regardless of the organizations we represent, we're human beings, and we needed to be connected to her, and she needed to feel our connection. She said to me at the very end, when I go to court tomorrow, are they gonna terminate my rights? Will I lose my baby? I just wanna see my baby. That was how I spent the first 2 hours of this morning. I can't answer that question about the baby, the law, but I needed her to know that she was not alone, that she has value. She's a human being and she's a member of our community. And my job is to make sure I rally a group that can come and be with her and to support her through this process. So that's what the beloved community does.
Thanks for sharing that, Belinda. So much of what you were saying just resonates and ties back to Yodit, like you said, Yodit's story at the beginning, this idea of the beloved community being an extension beyond just the family, right? To being community, really. So I'm really excited to dive in with that a little bit later. Yodit, did you have anything else to?
Just that, I don't know about others on the call, but I've felt that in my chest, in my throat, and we don't have to just talk about it. Like in this moment, we could really hold that mother and that baby tied to what Leslie told us about what the traumatic impacts of an experience like that are. And then Belinda uplifting, and this is something that I think we struggle with, is like, and feeling, like really feeling the impact of that, and allowing ourselves to feel that, not to push it away, but to really feel what the impact of that mother. So it choked me up a little bit, just as a mom myself. Just really, that really moved me. And if it did others, I just want us to feel what that trauma feels like, and we have to acknowledge it, or it does settle into the body. We're gonna bring Hoai An's voice into the space, Will, and also want to then, why don't you all, Hoai An, after you're done speaking, then Will's gonna maybe just offer a conversation prompt, and then let's continue to dialogue. Hoai An, beloved community, what's that for you?
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. So my name's Hoai An, she, her. I currently am the digital organizer for We the People Michigan, but I also have been doing work with Huron Valley Mutual Aid, and then the Facebook group Washington County Mutual Aid and Resources. I always forget the name. So when I hear about the term community, it's interesting because a lot of people use this word loosely. Some people use it to describe something very specific, but other times when people think about it, they can say, like, what does that mean? And someone that I have looked up to for a long time, another disabled Asian organizer, which seems so specific to me, that there's other people like that. Her name is Mia Mingus, and she created something called PODS in the Bay Area, Transformative Justice Collective. And the reason they developed this term and they think about people in terms of pods was because sometimes when people think of the word community, it can seem so overwhelming to you. Of when they say, we have to look out for those in our community, we have to protect everybody. In Ann Arbor, what, there's like 100,000, I don't know, but there's a lot of people, right? And that's a lot of people to think about. And so when I'm thinking about community, when I first started to organize, I was born and raised in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Both of my parents are refugees, but I was raised by my mom as a single parent. And the first work that I did when I started doing work exactly was in immigration. And the people that I've always felt closest to, the people that I've always felt tied to, were folks who were also first generation Americans, were folks whose parents were refugees, have always been folks who came from similar backgrounds as me. And so when I was doing work with people who I identified with, who were around me, that was where my community was stretching, right? Is when we're finding people that we're in those relationships with, and that we have that so much in common with, and we can identify our shared struggle with. Those are the folks that I was thinking of who were in my community, who are in my beloved community. And especially in times like right now, right, with so much anti-Blackness occurring, with everything going on in the pandemic, what are the ways in which we can be stretching our boundaries or our visions of who we have these shared struggles with, to be building out our community and to actually be caring for one another. So I mentioned before, I'm doing a lot of work around mutual aid, and this is something that I've started formally doing for the first time, but it's not something that I have never done before. And I think that actually that's the case for a lot of other folks, right? Like what Belinda was talking about earlier, in terms of, you know, you're doing something and you know what this concept is, but you didn't know the actual term, right? And I think especially as people are entering on this work for the first time, sometimes people know exactly what you're talking about and they've experienced it and they know, but they don't know the specific word, right? And there's already a lot of cool mutual aid efforts that are happening around here locally. We have the Kekere Freedom School, we have the Mutual Aid Network of Ypsilanti, we have a lot of re-entry work that already occurs, but there are also a lot of places in which we can be growing together. And I think something important about mutual aid is that it inherently happens outside of the state. It's happening outside of the nonprofits, because nonprofits are really tied to a lot of limitations, right? Not the nonprofit, not that, you know, people who are in nonprofits are bad, or that they don't come into this work with the intention of helping everybody, but they become really tied to having to do numbers that are tied to the money that they get, or they have to report certain things. And that's why all the work that we do has to not have that, right? We can't have those boundaries on who we help, because if everybody is there who needs that aid from us, if they're all in there with us together, then those are the people that we need to be extending it to, right? How can we not have this culture of disposability where only some people who have X, Y, and Z qualifications are able to receive aid and actually be welcomed into our community, and everybody else, we're like, sorry, you know, go do something else. And so when we're thinking about, you know, mutual aid work, and we're thinking about where it comes from, of course, you know, Kropotkin is someone, an anarchist, who developed a lot of theory around mutual aid work. And if you ever look up anarchy, even like on the Google form definition, it's like anarchy is mutual aid, solidarity, not charity. And that's true. And also, what are the ways in which this has been around for such a long time, right? It's caring for each other. It's reciprocal. It's not transactional. You're hearing we need you, and that's why we're going to hold you right now in this way. And you're going to be holding us in other ways as you can. So just to wrap up quickly, because I know I've been a little bit over, but to me, I think Beloved Community is community run. It's focused on building the relationships we need, and mutual aid is about providing for one another what we need. So who are the people you can call on? Who are the people you can identify within an area that you're in? And when we're talking about everything that's going on right now with defunding police and abolition, we can't have that and not have anything after that, right? So Beloved Community is cultural, like my culture as a refugees kid, where I was grown up, and I was lucky enough to have some places in which I was more decolonized than others. And every time I was doing something that wasn't socially acceptable, it was just more colonizing. So how do I get away from that now? And how can we keep taking care of each other? So how can we be in intergenerational spaces? How can we learn from our elders? How can we do all the things that are holding each other? And community to me is really a commitment to building what we need with each other and for each other.
Throwing the game, Hoai An. Thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, early on when you were talking about pods, there was a lot of resonance happening in the chat box, and I absolutely like the dolphins thing connected with me as well. So shout out to, I think, to Kisa, who was that brought that in. Man, this idea of like the formal versus the informal, right? And you brought up Kropotkin, and just the recognition yet again that even that person had to learn from communities that were doing this work outside of this, you know, dominant culture narrative, right? And there, I think that, you know, what you were talking about, and what I hope you'll talk a little bit with us some more about, is just, again, these ideas of people know how to do this. You know, it's just that there's this term in the dominant culture or in the zeitgeist for it now, right? Ooh, pardon me. So as we are kind of continuing, and, you know, I think we'd love to kind of hear you all talk and riff off of each other again. One of the things that was coming up to me as all three of you are talking is this idea of accountability in a way that is not necessarily tied to institutions, right? You know, Leslie, I think of the ways in which you are creating communities that are accountable to mothers and children from the jump, right? And Belinda, obviously, the ways in which peacekeeping creates ways of being accountable to one another that don't rely on the institutions. And then, of course, Hoai An, mutual aid is all about folks being accountable to one another and creating, like you said, these real ideas of community, right? So if we can, I would love to ask you all to talk about that a little bit more. And Hoai An, you know, you just brought up these really, you brought up your own experience, right, coming from a family of refugees. And I'd love to kind of, if you wouldn't mind kicking us back off, in talking about like, what were some of the ways, you know, I think that Yodi Anenya and I heard about stories in which your family was kind of accountable to the folks around them. Would you mind kind of sharing some more and talking about that with us?
Yeah, there's a truck right outside, so hopefully it's not bleeding over. But so yeah, so when I like I said, I was born and raised here, and because of, you know, the University of Michigan, because of so many other things, Ann Arbor really is a place at times, right? Like, not to say that this is a really like diverse liberal place, as people like to say it is, but it is a place where a lot of immigrants and refugees will cycle through at some point. And so when I was growing up, that was where my mom was finding all of her people. And our house was always full of folks who were just, you know, like they can't afford to go home for the holidays, or they can't afford to go home at this point. And so they're all coming to our house, right? And we weren't celebrating ever Thanksgiving or something like that to celebrate colonization in any way. But it was always, how can we be holding these people around us? How can we be creating a space for folks around us who don't have anywhere to go? And if they don't have anywhere to go, they come here, because here's where they belong. And so in where my mom was always coming from was, if somebody needs something, or then we help them out, because we're going to need something as well, and we're going to help each other in that way. So, you know, there were always, for Thanksgiving, we would always have people coming by with food and whatever, and that was their offer to us. And our offer to them was, come into this space, and we want to be holding you in this room. We want you to be here with us and spending time with us and sharing to us about where you come from. And what was interesting to me about that is that, you know, it was the sharing the food, the sharing the whatever, and it also extended to everything else, right? Like, what do we have that you need at this time? Do you need money? Like, we have that. Or if you need something else, we have that as well. And it wasn't that we had an abundance of these things, right? Like, we were not rich at all. We didn't have a big house. We didn't have all this stuff. But it was the vein of, this is what we have at this time, and we can offer this to you. And when you have something, you know, we know that in some way, like, it'll be not paid back, but we'll be here in this community together. And at some point we'll be holding you, and you'll be holding us. And that, to me, I think was a lot of the beginnings of how I learned about mutual aid, really specific to the place where I was growing up.
Thank you for sharing that, Hoai An. I mean, just this idea of holding the people, right? So I'm going to give that over to Leslie in just a second, because Leslie, earlier you said the same thing, but I just also want to bring up two other things that you said that were so awesome. This idea of abundance, and then this idea of need. And you said need a number of times, but you also said you invited folks over to celebrate the holidays and things like that. And I think that that's just a beautiful way of realizing that need encompasses more than just, you know, deficit, right? But it's like this larger way of being in community. So Leslie, do you mind kind of taking us from there? You said something about holding earlier that was super poignant.
Yeah. I, you know, was connecting beloved community to, you know, how we're born and how we're held. And I would offer that, and this is, you know, sort of this new aha moment for me this morning in my prayer and meditation time. I was thinking about, you know, this conversation, and I was thinking about how Belinda talked about her work with families, and now sitting here, you know, listening to the story of the mother and her children, that resonates, because I had this moment where, you know, it occurred to me, I was connecting my own family. I have 3 sets of grandparents. I have two pairs of maternal grandparents and one my paternal. And the reason I have that is because my mom's biological mother and father were not able to care for her materially and health-wise after my mom was born, 6 months after. And instead of allowing my mother to go into the system, which was the threat at that time, her biological uncle and his wife took her in and raised her. They are who I know, most know, right, as my grandparents. I called her my Nana. Like, that was where I was until I was 5 and went to school, right? I didn't know daycare. I knew Nana's house, right? And I wasn't her biological granddaughter. But it was because of the accountability of family, because of the holding of community, that, you know, my mother had that space and that I had that space. And I would also connect to the fact that it didn't come with shame, right, or punishment. Like, I still knew my biological grandparents. I knew they loved me, and you know, we didn't they weren't disrespected in the family context, right? We knew they had challenges, but it wasn't in the same way that our systems, our institutions judge people, label people, put people down. And so when I think about that, you know, my grandmother, in fact, raised 2 children that weren't her biological children, right? And so this idea that I hold in my own body and in my own work, that every baby is my baby, I realize it is like, comes from her, you know, that it comes from somewhere that I didn't even make the connection to. And so if we really think about, you know, holding pregnant folks and families in dignity and love and respect, no matter what the challenges they're going through, no matter whether or not they look like, think like, or act like whatever the us is, you know, what kind of care spaces do we create? And I think, you know, especially in the realm of pregnancy and birth, you know, folks focus so much on the outcome, right? Like, oh, is there a healthy baby? And yeah, sure, that should be, and this is one of our doulas in Birth Detroit, is like, you know, that is not a goal, that should be a standard, right? Like, that should be the way it is. And we should layer into that, right? That how we care, the spirit of the care we provide, that matters. And that too, we hold, and it impacts us. And so for me then, you know, I feel like as we're building Detroit's first freestanding birth center, that, you know, we are accountable to tell a different story about birth in Black bodies. We are accountable to expect more from the birth experience and to give families more, right? And we're accountable to lead in our own care because we can, because we know how, because Granny Midwives taught us how, right? And all we have to do is remember. And so we got a lot of work to do there.
You know, Les, you remind me, and I actually yesterday realized that it was a real defining moment. Our mutual friend Celeste Davis, who's on with us today, but also out in the DC, Maryland area, I called her and I was shocked at my own naivete. I was like, Celeste, how is Prince George's County, you know, the place that we uplift as where, you know, Black sort of achievement, right? We have, you know, higher socioeconomic statuses, better, you know, health outcomes, better education, better. Like, we lifted that up. And I think many of us saw the New York Times article a couple years back where still the children who are born into those families in Prince George's County, which are by all American and US standards, right, are supposed to be thriving, are still 60% more likely to fall into poverty. But related to this moment, I called Celeste after seeing a report about the disparate outcomes of Black folks in Prince George's County related to COVID-19, right? And kind of naively, I was like, hold up, Celeste, how is that happening? She said, honey, racism, right? And so when you talk about the spirit of care, it makes me think about, after all the research and all the money and all the conversations and all the ways in which, you know, the healthcare or care sector has been responding to infant mortality and mother-baby mortality rates that are on par with developing countries right here, when we know that when Black African immigrants come to this country, that really quickly their health outcomes tank and become on par to their children's, that you just made me think about when you say the spirit of care, right? And that we are creating, and the birth center that you're creating in a spirit of care that still largely does not exist in the US healthcare system, not for us and not for our children. And actually, I think it's an interesting segue to have Belinda maybe talk a little bit about her own story, if you will, but maybe that'll give you just a moment to think about that and to reflect on it. But I appreciate what you offer. Belinda, talk to us a little bit. There was a particular story you shared, a pivotal moment in your own life with your best friend's mom.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll share that story. So I grew up in Detroit. I was born in the late 60s. In fact, I was born the year of the uprising. So I was a little girl, a toddler and a little girl throughout the 70s, then became a teen as we moved into the 80s. During the 70s, there was a family in the neighborhood next door, a couple houses down, actually, that had 5 children, and the youngest child and I were best friends. We were the same age, we were schoolmates, played together, spent the night together, did all the things that you think little girls do. We did it together. She was my ace, if you will. And her mother was a heroin addict. We knew that because we could see her hands. In those days, shooting up in the hands was pretty common, and so we knew it. As a little child, though, this mom took care of her kids all week. She got them up for school, she cooked, she was very functional as a parent, but members in the community knew that she had an addiction. If you can imagine for a moment a community that is multi-generational. In my family, there were 4 generations of people. I was the 4th generation. My great-grandparents lived in that community. My grandparents lived not far away. My parents lived not far away, so my great-grandparents could be my childcare providers after school. So that's where I went when I got out of school. So I spent a lot of time with my elders. And they would talk about this particular woman and her needs, and they would support her, and they would offer her guidance and advice. They never called CPS. No one called the police on her. They took care of her. They took care of her children. They were not evicted. They never became homeless. They never was without. And I didn't understand that then as a kid. I was just another child in a community, and we would play outside. I'd spend the night at their home. They spend the night at my home. We ate together very often. My great-grandparents after school would have food prepared for us. We ate supper. They were from the South, so we ate supper at like 3:30, 4 o'clock in the evening. And then when our parents got home and picked us up, we go home and eat a little dinner too. But the elders took care of the community. They took care of this family. They held them tight. There was some conversation about when will this woman get her act together, get off of those drugs, get that monkey off her back. I remember those kinds of comments growing up. I don't know if that's unique to living in the D or not, but that's what I heard. But I remember the elders would say, in time, when she's ready, she will get better. In the meantime, it is our responsibility to take care of this family and to make sure she's okay, and make sure that she will always know that there's a path for her to get well, to go get rehabilitated, or whatever the language was of that time. And in time she did. When she was ready to make that full commitment to her sobriety, this woman, who, by the way, was referred to as my auntie, because in my community, you were aunties, uncles, if never could call anyone by their first names. And if you were Mr. or Mrs., this is because you did not live in that community. But if you, for a while, I didn't know who was blood relative or not, because everybody was auntie and uncle, and I could go sit at her house and eat and as if she was my biological aunt. But she did get clean. She became sober. Her children never turned their backs on her. And I believe it's because the community rallied around them to help them understand compassion and empathy. I believe that what our elders taught us with this family was to stay connected, was to take care of each other. Fast forward all these years when we're all grown with kids ourselves, this woman is a wonderful grandmother and still thrives with her kids and her grandchildren. She and my mom are about the same age. She's a little older than my mother, and my own mother keeps in touch with her. And we look out for her to this day. All of these years later, we're talking probably around 45, 47 years later, we're still looking out for her because she's an elder. She's the elder now, right? And we make sure that she's okay. So when I think about a beloved community and moving away from the reliance on institutions to fix our problems, that experience in my life and so many other experiences in my life allows me to remember that our collective wisdom can lead us towards the solutions that will restore and replenish our community. If even back in those days, and we know this is true now, we have the data to support it, and I won't bore you with that. If those children had been removed from the house and gone into foster care, those siblings probably would have been split up. They would have been removed from their community, from their school, and from each other. And the likelihood that the state agencies would have created time and space for this mother to have those healthy visits with each of her children, and for them to have those healthy visits with each other is very a low probability. And I say that with confidence because this is the work that, part of the work that the DRC does. We're fighting for time, for healthy engagement with parents when families find themselves in the foster care system. My community, old-fashioned indigenous practices, whatever we want to call it, those old people took care of us. And they passed down the practices and their wisdom of what it means to stay connected as human beings and to take care of each other. I'm gonna take another minute and just fast forward to the 80s when crack cocaine hit our community. Same neighborhood, same system. My great-grandfather was still alive. So I can still go to his house when I got out of high school by this time. The institutional approach to problem solving damaged my community. It has never been the same. I'm in my 50s now. When I go over there, it is unrecognizable. It began to be torn down and to deteriorate when the system, when the institutions came into play. Members of the community disappeared. Many of the boys, teenager boys, went away. We didn't know where they were. We found out that they were imprisoned. And we became afraid of each other. And I think that was the most devastating part of it. We learned from the institutions to fear one another. When you say super predator and we call kids monsters, old people began to wonder, is that true? Should I be afraid of these young people? And they began to be afraid. They stopped engaging. They stopped pouring down that wisdom, and the community collapsed. So that life experience of those two, one decade where we helped and supported and intervened and took care of each other, and then the next decade we feared each other and ran from each other. The only difference that I saw and that I still talk about today is that institutions came into our community and changed the narrative about our human connectedness and our need to be interdependent and to take care of each other. They took over the narrative, repackaged it, relabeled it, called it something that was not, that was foreign to us, and we began to fear one another. And while that was happening in my small area of Detroit, I think it happened throughout the city of Detroit. And this is what we have decades later. This is what we have today. So moving away from those ideals and concepts that create that sense of strength and community, and relying on outside institutions to fix us and to fix our problems, creates a lot of chaos and disconnection and discord. And if Detroit can be an example of anything, if it can be an example of anything, let it be an example of how, when it's so in disarray and disrepair, it's hard to put those links back together again. We flee, so I'm not there, because I was afraid to be there. The next generation of my family, which is my son, is not there because I was afraid to be there. So I had him someplace else. So that concept of community is not a 1 year time sensitive project. It is a lifelong commitment of staying connected, working through our conflict and problems and discord together, and always seeing the value of one another. And I'll stop there.
Wow, Belinda.
Let's just just 10 seconds, because that was a word. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, you can see it in, I mean, everybody's saying.
Yeah, I'm kind of shocked myself. So I'm kind of, thank you all for seeing value in my stories, but I'm kind of shocked.
No, I mean that you did an amazing job for us there, Belinda. I think just like the transition of, Leslie's idea that every baby is my baby, right? And having a community that felt and believed that. And then the ways in which insidious institutional power shifted that. And again, to Leslie's comments earlier, the generational ripples that has, right? That was incredibly beautiful, and there's a lot there.
Can I localize that a little bit too? Because I think there are some of us, I know Leslie grew up around the Detroit area. I grew up in the Detroit area. Many of the Black folks that are not native of this area were a part of what Belinda described. My mother, who was, kind of lifted us up and came to Ann Arbor really under the guise of this liberal utopian that I think many of us now know is not true here. But also because of the income inequality, our county has the 8th worst income inequality in the country. You find that there's a concentration, a divide, a socioeconomic divide between Black and brown folks of means here, and then Black folks and brown folks who are living in deep poverty here. And I'm reminded of, many elders in Ypsilanti who remind me of urban renewal that happened in Ypsilanti, where we ran 94 through the south side of Ypsilanti. Lots of folks don't know that the equivalent of Greenwood or Black Bottom existed. Black folks didn't even cross Michigan Ave, didn't need to, because there were doctors and lawyers and physicians and folks owned houses and that sort of thing. So Ypsilanti in many ways is a microcosm of Detroit that often gets looped into this Washtenaw County narrative that frankly is very different. And there are some Black folks of means that came here that are having a very different experience than what Belinda described, that is a nuance and a complexity that I think we have to grapple with and we have to name here as well. I just appreciate that you uplifted that, because you could be here. I spent a ton of time living here but not working here, where I'd be in space and I never saw Black folks. In fact, the Leaders of Color program that we developed was really about, well, where in the hell are my peers? I need them. Thank you, Belinda. Will, we're right at the 1 o'clock hour, and I'd love to hear more from Leslie and Hoai An. Can you get there?
Absolutely. If either one of you, Hoai An, if you wanted to cabbage off of what Belinda had just shared, or share some closing thoughts with us, that would be absolutely excellent.
Yeah, I think that what Belinda was great. I'm like trying to still think through everything, and I'm sure that I'll be thinking of this for the rest of the day for sure. But I think so much of what you were talking about with our elders, and also keeping what we need in our community, like we have what we need, we have the conflict, makes me think so much about how much we are often outsourcing crucial decisions that we should be making for ourselves to other folks, whether that is through the politicians that we elect, and we let them make decisions for us instead of making them for ourselves, or even through when we're calling the police. Like Yodit was mentioning this morning, like what if Yodit had not wanted to, or did not find somebody else who wanted to talk to those folks, talk to strangers, right? And in what ways can we be skill building for ourselves to be learning how to do this stuff, right? Because like that kind of stuff is really scary. It can be really scary to say like there's nobody else but me, or there's nobody in this situation that can step up. But if we're all trained to do that, there are so many people who can be doing that, right? And I think particularly when we're talking about elders in our history, et cetera, there's so much of the work that we're doing that has been done before. And to me, that's actually a really hopeful thing, right? I think that when we first get into this work, it can seem so overwhelming, and we're like, oh my God, like we have to think of all this stuff for the first time. But we have this history that's really an open book for us to be looking towards, right? When the pandemic hit, a lot of the questions were, how are we going to feed all the kids, right? How are we going to feed all the kids who are getting breakfast from schools? Well, the free breakfast program did not come from an official in a public school, right? It came from the Black Panther Party, right? And when we're talking about conflict resolution and ways in which we can be dealing with folks, a lot of the work that Belinda is doing, right, that Belinda talks about, we're not talking about how can we ask like the police how to solve an issue for us. It's how can we look back to what Indigenous folks were doing way before any colonizer ever came to what's now America, and how can we be learning from them? So what are the ways in which we can be looking back to look forward and really taking those lessons and relearning them again? And we're not necessarily reprogramming, but we're deprogramming what we haven't taught, what our socialization has been, and making sure that we can remember what was there before. So that's I think what I'm thinking of. And I think the last thing I'll say is, how can we be looking at this in a place of abundance, right? If we're talking about the ways in which, like what Belinda was saying, the ways in which people have taken the work from us, and they haven't just taken it from us and we can access it somewhere else, right? They take it from us, they put so many barriers in front of it, and it's not just a barrier of like, oh, I have to go to this different place. It's, oh, well, now I have to pay a lot of money that I might not have, or now there's a timeline in which I can apply for this thing that I can't. What are the ways in which we can be doing away with those things and really thinking about, we have abundance. We have what we need when people are able to give up the wealth and the resources that we have. If we're looking at Ann Arbor, how much wealth do we have in Ann Arbor that people can be redistributing and giving back to our community, right? We have all these things. If we're talking about looking more globally, the military and capitalism, et cetera, the military is sitting on trillions of dollars. What if we had trillions of dollars? All the good work that's happening in this community is happening on a shoestring budget, right? We've helped hundreds of people at Huron Valley Mutual Aid, and we've only spent like $11,000. Like, that's so not a lot of money. I mean, to me, it's a lot of money, but to folks, it's not. So just thinking about the fact that they push us to have a scarcity mindset, oftentimes, and by they, I mean, administration, politicians, people in power, people of privilege, and we have all that we need right here. We just need to take what we have back. And so that's what Belinda was making me think of, and just all of this as well.
Thank you, Hoai An. So calls to re-engage with our own democracy and not outsource it, right? That direct kind of person-to-person democracy calls to take on an abundance mindset, and calls to look to the past, to look forward, right? To remember that we have these ways of being in our community. Thank you so much for sharing those. I want to bounce things over to Leslie. Leslie, as we're kind of closing here, what are your kind of challenges or closing thoughts for your community here?
Yeah, I would connect to Hoai An's idea of outsourcing and just, you know, kind of raise the question of the ways in which we relinquish our power. And in the context of my work, we relinquish pregnancy and birth care, right, to, you know, hospitals and health systems and obstetrics, to systems that do not love us and were never built for us in the first place, right? And so when we think about pregnancy and birth care, I mentioned granny midwives earlier, right? Pregnancy and birth care were colonized by obstetrics, right? Patriarchy, white supremacy pushed out midwives, right? Brought in obstetrics and then moved birth, right, to hospitals. And now, as we are understanding and shifting back to thinking about how and where we birth, and midwifery is becoming recognized more, again, 2% of midwives are Black, right? We still then have, right, our birth spaces where white supremacy continues, even in the midwifery field. And so we have so much, I think, to undo. And we have to be willing to tell the truth about what we're seeing, right? We have to be willing to tell the truth. We have to recognize the history. And, you know, in so doing, I think, you know, we look at ways to create what we need. And that is, you know, what I've heard, you know, from Belinda and Hoai An, and what we're trying to do, you know, with Birth Detroit. As we think about our values, I'll just, you know, end on the spirit of care. Our values as an organization center love. Our values are safety, love, trust, and justice, right? That any and everyone who comes through our doors will know loving care, right? That there's no hierarchy of human value there. And that's what we have to get beyond, right? Like the hierarchy of human value we've imposed based on race, on class, on gender, on attractional orientation, on immigration status, right? Like, what if we could let that go? And what if, you know, we could build and reimagine systems of care and of justice that truly loved us all?
Thanks, Leslie. Of course, that was awesome. Well, so you all, we gotta stop outsourcing to systems that don't care about us. We are going to tell the truth when we see it, recognize the history, and we are going to center safety, love, trust, and justice to move forward. Those are some powerful calls. Thank you so much, Leslie. And last but certainly not least, Belinda, do you mind sharing your closing thoughts, your challenges to our community?
Sure. Belinda, if you can if you could talk about time, I just want to make sure I hear you.
That's what I was going to do. Thank you. Thank you. I would add to Hoai An's and Leslie's comments, the concept of time. We must rethink about how tethered we are to the concept of time. A lot of my teaching over the last 6-7 years have been from Indigenous people, our Native American communities in Northern Michigan. And one of the things that they said to me early on was, time is the white man's problem. If a problem takes 3 days of sitting around the sacred fire to work out, we will sit 3 days around that sacred fire and work it out. For some reason, as we continue to recycle these sound bites, and we know we have a race problem, we know we have inequity, we know we have disparities, for some reason, we think we should be able to walk through that information, those problems, and think it through and come to a solution in 45 minutes. We really need to rethink how we allow time to create pressure, stress, and in many cases, re-traumatize those of us who have been oppressed. It is offensive to think that you're going to resolve a race problem that has been impacting me directly in a few hours or a few days. when we know that this has been hundreds of years creating the problem. Hundreds of years of time has been invested in that problem, and we want to resolve it in a matter of hours or days. We really have to rethink how we think about time and how to untether ourselves from that concept and allow the voices to take place, to speak. If everyone in this Zoom had the opportunity to speak about one subject, how much time would it take? But how impatient would we be? And so I want to leave all of us with that and how we deal with time and how time becomes such a function of our decision-making and problem solving. And how do we move away from that and allow ourselves the time and space to grieve, to cry, to sit with information, and then take small steps forward to sustainable solutions that will last a lifetime. So I want to leave the group with that.
Man, Belinda, that is like...
When Will scratches his head like that, you have officially blown his mind.
Yes. Well, we rethink our tethering
Come
to
on
the
now.
concept of time. Wow. Wow.
I mean, how fitting, right? Because we've devoted so little time. I mean, we keep coming back to this. We had said we would take the summer off with Centering Justice, but we just felt like we needed more time, Belinda, more time with you all, more time with our community, more time to decolonize our minds, to be actively like hearing from folks who are out ahead of this, who are dialed in, who are tapped into it. When the calls to defund and abolish the police came, my biggest fear, frankly, is that white folks would co-opt that, well-intended, but that they would co-opt that movement and it would miss what the real message is. And that is what you said, Belinda, and what you said, Leslie, that we have to invest time in caring for our community, and we have to center those who have been most impacted. I watched a man sing last night after spending 37 years in prison for a crime he had not committed. And I thought, it is he could tell you in a matter of minutes what about the punishment system was broken, right? That he couldn't afford legal care, that he was poor, that he was Black, that he was a man, that it was a white woman who had accused him, right? Like, there didn't need to be a whole lot of analysis. And yet, more often than not, we are in spaces making decisions for people who are not in that space with us. So we needed time to be with you all so that New isn't complicit in that, so that others have an opportunity to see their role in this beloved community that we want, and so that those of you who are too often unseen as Black, Indigenous, and people of color leaders, that you have a chance, we have a chance to lead us forward. And so it is in that immense gratitude that we thank you for the time you were able to offer. And I can see the chat box is blowing up, y'all, because nobody wants to end. So we do formally end now, and then usually we hang on for 15 more minutes because folks want to talk. And because we have such a big group, Ananya, maybe you could help us talk about how we can use the rest of this time.
Yeah, so if you have somewhere to be, we're so glad to have you with us today, and we'll say goodbye to you. And if you would like to stay with us, we invite you to stay with us. And if you have any questions that are coming up for you, I think now, because we have a larger group still with us, you could put those in the chat box or use your hand raise function or just wave and we can call on you.
I saw Kaz's hand go up. Kaz, were you hoping to jump in, or were you saying bye?
Hey, no, I'm gonna just wanted to say one thing on, I was taking a lot of notes, as y'all can see, so I'm just wanted to run through real quick, because I really, when we're talking about struggle and trying to find mutual ground, on these issues where often it's very hard to find people who can directly relate to us. You know, I was thinking about how my dog Chip, who's in the back over there, you know, he'll come to me if I'm feeling down or if I'm not feeling well. And it's not because he directly identifies with whatever I may be going through, but he identifies with the fact that I'm going through a struggle. And I just think that it's so backwards that we as human beings, as complex as we make things out to be, it could really be as simple as that, as just understanding that everyone goes through struggle, and struggle in and of itself is a part of life. And if we can identify that and understand that, and we can understand that no matter what the struggle may be, we do not have to directly identify with that struggle to be able to empathize with others and to be able to grow with others and help each other grow off of those struggles. Um, but I see too often that, you know, people will pick sides and claim others don't understand, when it's not about understanding exactly how you feel, but identifying the fact that it is a struggle, and struggle is a part of life, and we can either accept it and move on and try and become better people, or we can sit there and complain about it, and complain about how nobody identifies with us. And I think that that kind of, we really have to bring each other together. You know, we really have to come together and understand that, you know, race, class, sex, whatever the struggle may be, there is a struggle, and struggle is the word, and that's the only thing that should matter. You know, and we need to take that and be able to grow. You know, and right now we're policed by people who rarely come from our community, and they don't identify with our struggles, and they don't even see that we're struggling, because the policing force that is now operates under the guise that there are criminals in our midst, and those criminals need to be caught, and not that our community is struggling, and that struggle needs to be helped out, and we need to be helped. All of us need to be helped out. You know, there's a struggle in every single community, whether it be family, whether it be institutional, whether it be systemic. And so I really think that, you know, we have to be able to, however we move forward with our justice system, it has to be able to more clearly be able to identify the fact that crime comes from struggle. And so if we can work to eliminate that struggle, we can eliminate a lot of that crime, most of it. I mean, people don't steal usually just because they want to steal. Most of the time, people steal out of necessity. And something happened somewhere along the line where our system failed our people and created that necessity, created that mentality that I have to do this to feed my family. I have to do this to make money, you know? And yeah, that's all I wanted to say on that topic. But I was sitting on that, and I was taking a lot of notes on it, and I really liked the discussions today. And it was, I mean, the time as a tether really struck me. And it doesn't matter how long it takes, but we need to start somewhere. And we spend more of that time discussing where to start rather than just starting and going into it. You know, that's all I have to say on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Kaz. Man, I mean, when you opened up with the line about, you know, how your dog doesn't understand what you're struggling, but understands that you are struggling and that you deserve compassion, man. I mean, that floored me immediately. And I'm not surprised that came from your mouth, because you did it last time too, bro. So I just want to say that. And I think that, you know, so much of what you were sharing about the ways in which the system devalues people connects back to what Belinda was saying. So Belinda, I saw that you came off mute, and I just wanted to offer you an opportunity to circle into that if you had something to say along those lines.
No, I just wanted to thank Cass for his comments and say that this is an example of the collective wisdom of a group, right? The answer is here, it's with us. And so that's all I wanted to say, that he's right on point. Well, my other thought, Cass, I'm sorry, was when you mentioned the police. One of the conversations we had as we were preparing for this afternoon was the history of the police. Where did they come from? So they're doing, in my mind, exactly what they were designed to do, to look for something to be wrong, even when there isn't, even when the answer is within the group, the collective wisdom of the group. The police are doing exactly what they're designed to do. I think their attempts to do something different, we give it a different label when it looks just a tad bit different. But if you go back to the history of the slave police, they were set up to look for something wrong and to keep Black folks in check, to make sure we were working and we stayed on the plantation. We stayed where we were supposed to be, where we belong, because we were property. And I don't know that even after all these hundreds of years, I don't know that we've moved too far away from that ideal, that ideology around police. That's just an opinion. That's not the opinion of New, so I'll own that.
No, you don't have to qualify it, and it's not an opinion, it's fact. That's the root of
the root of the police.
That's not
is
an opinion.
Yeah.
Their job was to police black bodies, in the same way that many in many cases, schools were a place for our children to go so we could put people to work, right? To support systems, in the same way that nonprofits were created. We want to talk about complicity or New, right? We're a part of a system that does perpetuate charity and not solidarity. And I'm ever more aware of that every day. But if we don't name it, if we don't talk about it, we can't heal. We can't heal. If we keep trying to reform systems, and Lord knows I have done my fair share of that. But if we keep, Leslie just put in the chat box that systems inevitably work to perpetuate themselves, right? So if we don't dismantle them, if we don't create a new, we become complicit. So I appreciate you saying that. And it's important that we know we're not talking about police officers. We are talking about a system of punishment that is connected to policing, that is connected to prisons, that is connected to that mama and child protective services, that is connected to how and where we birth, that is connected to why it is that the nonprofit sector exists, right? All of those things are interwoven. They are not independent of one another. So thank you for that, Belinda. Oh, Sally is on, Will, if you saw her. Was there someone else?
Nope. Sally is up next.
Hey, Sally, thanks for being with us.
I was fascinated by Isabel Wilkerson's article in the New York Times Magazine last Sunday, when she talked about how we all say we're not racist. Everybody says they're not racist, except the people who really know that we all are racist. But she said that it's because we want to deny how artificial race is. And that's why we deny that we're racist. But she also said it's a caste system. And when your arm is in a cast, it's rigid. And when you're in the cast in a play, you have a certain role to play and you don't deviate from that. And we have a caste system that's binary. It's not as complex as India's caste system, which has 4 layers and many others. But we have one that leaves out Native Americans. But everybody, what Belinda said reminded me of this, everybody knows their place. And it's more rigid than what we usually refer to as racism.
Sally, that was extremely poignant. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that.
It's worth reading the article. It's
you mind? Will you drop the name or the link into the chat box? That would be awesome. Thank you so much.
Hey, Will, I noticed that Leslie had come off mute and wanted to give Leslie an opportunity to chime in.
Please.
I was coming off to sort of piggyback off of what Chaz and Belinda were saying about systems and perpetuating themselves. I would connect that as well to just what Sally just said about our caste system in this country. I, really believe that even with this new awareness and awakening that's happening, many folks are not fundamentally getting to the heart of the matter, which is like what we believe about each other, right? What we see is like, as long as we believe in this caste system, as long as we believe in this hierarchy of human value based on race, that we will simply recreate that thing in a new way, right? So we got rid of slavery and we had Jim Crow. We got rid of Jim Crow, we still have residential segregation. We still have mass incarceration. We're still killing unarmed Black men. Let's theoretically say we stop doing that. What's next? Because we haven't fundamentally changed what we believe about each other, our values, our assumptions, our beliefs. I think we got to do that spirit work in addition to the work on our systems, because our systems reflect us.
Absolutely, Leslie. I mean, I think that's one of the things that often gets, that I often prickle about a little bit when I hear folks talking about issues of race and racial justice. And, today, so much of the understanding is that these are systemic issues, and folks love to jump there as a way of deflecting their own personal responsibility to engage in that heart and spirit work, right? So it's like the only reason those systems are racist is because people had racist ideologies in their hearts and in their minds, and they built them into that. And if we're going to take them out, then that means that we have to do exactly what you were saying. So that is a beautiful sentiment. Hoai An, were you off mute for a second? Did I catch that?
Oh, I was. I wanted to wait for you to finish.
I'm done.
What this is making me think as well is that, again, when we're looking back to look forward, there's so much about the Spanish casta system that was created when before folks came here, but when people were coming here, that placed people at a hierarchy of these people are better, and if these people are not of this color, which was, as we know, there's so much tied into race and ethnicity, because it was all fake at one point, that they used to punish folks. And so if we're looking at the same people that were on the bottom of that hierarchy way back when, those are the same people who are on the bottom now. Those are the same people who we push into our jails and our prisons. And so all that stuff is just upholding these centuries of work that then come into our hearts and minds, as Will was saying. And it's not just racism, it's everything, right? It's also policing. What are the ways in which we now have police in our hearts and minds? And particularly, again, in this moment when we're trying to think of ways to move away from police, move away from abolition, what are the ways in which we think some ideas don't make sense? Or what are the ways in which we're struggling with countering ideas in ourselves because of how much we want to throw people away, because of how much we want to punish people, right? And that's something that I try to think about a lot, because to me, as an abolitionist, there are so many ways in which how society is right now that people are saying oh, this idea doesn't make sense, right? Because so many of us are operating with this place of racism in our hearts and minds, with police in our hearts and minds. And if you're really operating of a place of, we need to just take care of people as people, and we need to undo the wrongs of centuries past that people are propagating and perpetuating every single day. The stuff that we've been talking about, the stuff that Leslie's doing, stuff that Belinda's doing, whatever, all that stuff seems very clear. It makes sense. And it's the only way to go.
Hoai An, what you said, it made me just think of what is this. I've been having this question recently, what is the ultimate goal of community, of society, of being in this way, right? And I think what you're getting to is this idea of that community is the goal and that wealth is not. And we need to kind of divorce ourselves from that way of thinking and that way of being in order to get to where you were saying, to fully embrace an abolitionist perspective. I truly appreciate that. So I'm gonna just pause real quick and check in with my boss, Ananya. because I know that we are my clock is reading 1:37.
Yeah,
And
way
you
over
told
time.
you told me 1:30, but at the same time, I am actively trying to untether myself from this concept of time. Like if Belinda's going to say it and we're going to agree that it's important, then we can't just get locked into it and perpetuate that shit right now, right? So 1:38. Ananya, I'm asking, I'm leaning to you on whether or not we can have more minutes.
Absolutely is my answer. I guess I want to invite you to go if you need to and to feel okay doing that. And we will hold the space until it feels right to part ways, which might be never. So
That was a trick question, you all. I've worked with Ananya for over a year now. I knew she was going to say that. So I see Ryan is off of mute. Ryan, was there something you wanted to chime on in with?
I do. I want to bring forth, well, first some background. My name is Ryan Johnson. I'm building principal in Ypsilanti. It's my second year there. So I thank you for the invites. I know Alina is instrumental in this panel and working with you guys and bringing a lot of insight. But at the same time, to acknowledge myself, I am a white male and I'm working in a predominantly, African-American building. And I understand the privileges that were given to me and where I stand. And, I also bring a lot of nervousness to this conversation. And I just want to have everybody know that, I'm pushing myself to learn and to grow and to be more accepting of everything that's going on in the society. And so when Belinda was talking about her story about when she was a young girl and the mother that was on heroin and leaning on the community and the elders to help guide her friend and her childhood friend and to becoming and having that time to develop maturity or the time to want to learn to parent. I take, I guess, going into the system as being a mandated reporter for children that may be suffering within the homes. I know what I'm legally supposed to do, right? I know what I'm supposed to do and to not coincide or communicate with parents and to, especially when there's extreme evidence of neglect and or abuse. So I guess what I'm leaning on is maybe Belinda or somebody, like, what are some strategies that you may have that I know that there's a child in trauma or a child in certain circumstances that I'm supposed to report, but Belinda, you say you're bringing in a system that may take away from the children and the families, but at the same time, where that puts me in a really sticky situation, being a mandated reporter and possibly losing my job and validity with, within the YCS community. So I guess I'm looking for maybe structures and or strategies. I have some in my mind, but I really would like to hear from this group.
So since Ryan said Belinda's name, I'll start first with a response. Hi, Ryan, nice to meet you, and thank you for being here. So that's not your question is a question that I've heard a number of times. Folks they have certifications and licensings, and their job status is tied to their mandated reporting status. So I'm not going to ask you to do anything that will compromise your career and put you in danger of not being compliant with your mandated reporting. So I think, talking about strategies and approaches to help this child or children that might be in your building in mobilizing the community to surround itself to be support for this family. But I don't want to lose sight, and I might be speaking in an unpopular way, and I've shared my personal story. I don't want to lose sight that mother is needing help too. She's been harmed, she's been traumatized, she's been something in her life. She needs support too, and that's where we fail. Quite frankly, we fail and I do this for a living. I used to sit in person in court. Now I do sometimes on Zoom. Parents in that situation often have no one in the courtroom with them. They are alone. Everybody has failed them. And sometimes the school districts failed them. And this problem exacerbates. One of the things that I think I said during my comments was that the institutions have to be a part of the community. They have to redefine themselves to be that space to offer support and healing as well. So wouldn't it be better if you didn't have to do a mandate report that will have kids removed, and you can call someone to say, I need more resources and help for a family that's in crisis in my building, and we need help right now, and can the drug court or the drug rehabilitator or whomever come and set up shop after school in my building? Because often parents know how to get to their school when they can't get to no place else. They know how to get to that building. Wouldn't it be nice if we could have that kind of support in the school or within the district so this mother can access resources to get herself well? If mom needs to go away to deal with her wellness, then wouldn't it be wonderful if members of the community were staged and prepared to help continue taking care of these kids so that they would not have to leave their school and that they don't have to leave their community, the place that they may feel the most comfortable in. So again, the institution, if it is a member of society, it will understand your situation fully and your requirement to report. It will understand the needs of that child or the children and the needs of the mother, and we would mobilize to address those needs right where they are. And that's the reimagined community that I'm talking about. And I also want to say, from a school district's perspective, you might know this, Ryan, so forgive me, I'm speaking out of turn, but somewhere in Dearborn, that's what a school is doing. They've brought these community resources into the school so parents can access it easily. There's a DHH office set up in a school building so folks can apply for food assistance right there at school, because again, parents typically can get to their school if they can't get anyplace else. So I want to encourage IPSI community schools, and I think Elena was on this gathering, and encourage you to say that there are members of the community who want to rally around Ypsilanti Community Schools to do just that, bring the resources that are available into your school. Hoai An has said it, there's a lot of wealth in Washtenaw County. We're not lacking. It's how it's distributed and deployed that needs to be rethought. And institutionally, I want to challenge those institutions to rethink their role in the community. So that's my comment, and others may have some ideas as well.
Thank you so much for that, Belinda. I mean, I think that was just an excellent kind of way to, we do have to wrap up, but I think that's an excellent place for us to continue in our personal journeys, and for the next time that we come back around this idea. You know, Ryan brought up this beautiful, complex, nuanced position of being a part of these institutions and recognizing that you have to make some change, but you don't necessarily have all of those levers, right? So maybe one of the places that we can continue to explore is some of these ideas that Belinda brought up, of different ways that our institutions can reimagine themselves and shift, right? Again, I think that Yodit brought up an awesome point in the chat box, if you didn't see it, that, you know, it shouldn't be the teachers whose responsibility this is, right? But if we are a community, then that means that we can shape this institution so that, like Belinda said, right, there's other resources. And a school isn't just a place for us to educate our children in service of capitalism, but it becomes a greater community resource of education, of nourishing and support. So thank you all so much for these incredible comments. I want to thank Leseliey Welsh, Belinda Dulin, and Hoai An Pham for joining us today. Our fantastic supporters and friends at Ginsberg and United Way, and of course, Ananya and Yodit for helping us put all this jazz together.
Thank you. I'm so glad you're part of this, Will. And I appreciate your word and your offering when we started too, my friend. Thanks, everyone. Have a beautiful day. The rain is coming down for us. Belinda,
All right.
Leslie, Hoai An, y'all brought the rain. Blessings upon blessings. See you
Bye-bye.
all.
In August. We'll see you
Bye-bye.
in August.
Yeah, we'll see you in August. See you next month.
Okay. Okay, great. Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.